I'm sure you've heard the word productized, and you probably immediately thought, that's not for me. My work is too custom, my clients are too different, and you can't put a price tag on what I do and then call it a product. And honestly, that thinking really makes sense if you only know one version of what productized means, but productization isn't a single model, it's a spectrum. And somewhere on that spectrum is a version that likely fits your agency, your clients, and the way that you want to grow. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the different ways top creative agencies are productizing right now so you can find the one that actually works well for you. So what does productization actually mean? It's not those unlimited design subscriptions like Design Pickle for flat rate packages. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get, 3 social media posts or 3 blog posts. It doesn't need to be that version of customized. It's a fixed price for a fixed outcome that the client's looking for, regardless of the specific delivery style as an example. So the goal for productization is leverage, more clients, less chaos without having to need to add more hours, specifically for you as the owner, allowing for you to be able to actually broaden your horizons and actually have more impact with more clients. So I want you to think of it more as a bit of a continuum, if you will, where you go from this pure oriented service to focus more on the outcome for the client. So where you land on that continuum really depends on your goals and how you're able to figure out the way that you're best going to actually apply this. So let's define the continuum. On one end, you have a service and there's zero process, largely the way that the agency for you likely originally started. In the middle, you have a productized service, a fully defined service with a process of how it's actually developed. And on the other end, you have the actual product and it's just the process to follow, right? Where it could even be a book that defines the process, right? Like that on that end of the spectrum. So most creative agencies belong somewhere in the middle. And the question is not whether you productize necessarily, it's more how far do you actually go? And so if you think about it in that full spectrum of every single thing's different, there is no system, there is no process, to you are actually just a process, there's a large spectrum in between. So let's talk about some of the examples of different models that you can use. So the guided implementation model. So this is the done with you oriented model, a very common one that is used where you are built around clients that are trying to implement a proven system with your guidance. Frameworks, templates that are already built, clients ultimately do a lot of the work that allows for them to be able to do. You have, group-oriented environments, calls, Slack communities, that sort of thing. You don't necessarily directly solve the problems for them specifically on that same day. You have a system that actually goes through there. You're able to guide them through it. Different people with slight augmentations to the system. This is best for agencies that have really meaningfully battle tested their process and want to meaningfully leverage them and have a wider breadth of impact to a larger group of people. Bluntly, this is not your starting point. You're going to need to have gone through real client work behind you first to have developed these process and have them battle tested. So now let's talk about more model 2, where you have this productized oriented consultative work. I want you to think fractional CBO or fractional CMO oriented type of thing, where you have guided execution with expert. You have fixed milestones in feedback of what you're ultimately doing. In a lot of instances, the client may do and should be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. You step in to review, shape, polish, push the work, make sure that things are working. You may even have, different team members that they have on their team. You may even bring in contractors to allow for things to actually happen. But you are not starting from scratch here. You're applying a proven pattern of things that are working. So this is best for agencies that want to maintain a lower amount of overhead or a lower amount of team members, where it's you have an incredibly talented practitioner, that you don't actually want to do the done for you work. You're not really interested in the community oriented side of things. You want to actually have these very close-knit oriented relationships, but you also don't want to have a massive team, but you want to be able to continue to grow and have an incredible amount of impact. Another model. So the kind of implementation sprint, right? This is a very common model. So it's built ultimately for speed. You have potentially fixed scopes over specific periods of time. It may be a 5-14 oriented day sprint, 1 to 2 week sprints, even all the way up to a month. You're going through different types of sprints. You may go, a strategy sprint, a design sprint, or 2 strategy sprints, and then a design sprint or 2 design sprints. And how you actually go, depending on the client work, is how do you actually build what actually is necessary. And so you build everything live, you can potentially use templates, but you're following a system within each given sprint that allows for things to ultimately work. So your leverage comes from the repetition and actually doing things on an ongoing basis, or you have a system that you're installing on an ongoing basis basis where you have a repeated oriented process that you actually follow. This works if your solution is actually truly meaningfully standardized with the right team members in place. So the key component to this is if you're actually involved in the sprint is one version of it, but as you start to remove yourself, you need to actually have a meaningful team that is senior enough that can actually manage these sprints. This is meant for an agency with highly repeatable deliverables and really tight systems in the way that they communicate. Then there's the workshop-oriented model, where many people are ultimately looking for the same outcome and being able to actually work towards that together. So you have an agenda that you actually follow, you're going through the same steps, but the impact, the conversations are ultimately more fluid with that specific client, and they end with a finished asset. So there's no custom pacing to this. The destination really should be identical for every single participant. Where the personalization comes in is from the questions that are ultimately answered in the room and the details that are ultimately derived. Then the outcome of the document, right, is that how you actually put that information and surmise it into it. This is very common for agencies that have a common pathway that they follow where they're going through a workshop that is very standard. I want to also caveat and say this, that you can also use a montage of these different models as well. The next model that I want to talk about is more how you actually think about the continuity or the individual pieces of things. So one of the most common that I actually see, especially with larger oriented clients, so if you're working with enterprise oriented clients, is I want you to think about it more like Lincoln logs or Jenga blocks, where the product is actually one log and you're building an entire scope of work of several different logs. And it might be 100, it might be 10, it might be 2, but there is a process for each of the given blocks that allow for you to be able to meaningfully build things out and allows for you to actually have customization. So the reality of the world when you're working with enterprise clients is they expect a lot of nuance. And the reality, when you think about it, statistically speaking, the enterprise client are of a substantial size, which is a statistical anomaly. So you have the expertise being able to go through one specific sector as an example, where you have an incredible amount of expertise to be able to work with these types of clients, but they actually do expect to have some nuance for them, because the reality is that they actually do need nuance. So you may need, in an example, going through a research and brand project, you may need 5 consumer interviews or maybe 50. You may be needing to do 2 competitive landscape of 2 competitors, maybe 10. It really depends on what it is that they're looking to have as inputs and outputs and how much risk factor there is in what they're currently working on. Is it a rename? Is it a product naming? What exactly are you actually working on? So thinking through it that way, I find this being one of the most meaningful utilities of how you can actually go through this. Then the final model is what is a very normal way to go about it too, is kind of the Ford model, right? You have specific packages. Thinking about it more of like an assembly line oriented delivery system is that you may have different packages that are pre-baked, pre-figured out, that have exactly the same thing. So you may have 2 Jenga blocks in the first one, 3 Jenga blocks in the second, and 5 Jenga blocks in the third, and you just have them continuing to increase. Ultimately, the reality is the speed at which someone is able to achieve the outcome. Each one of them should achieve the outcome, but allowing for them to actually move faster. And so these are pre-packaged, pre-designed, and it's just fully on repeat, allowing for you to be able to do things entirely. I want you to think about, how do I actually go about choosing your model? I want you to think about how involved do you actually want to be in fulfillment. There's no wrong answer here. Like, I really enjoy working with clients on an ongoing basis. I find a lot of value with it. I get a lot of fulfillment out of it, and that's entirely a choice for you. So I am not knocking any one of these models. It's really about what you're looking for, and there's no judgment, and there shouldn't be any judgment from anyone. This is your business, your life. And how much customization do you actually want to introduce and offer with your client? So that predominantly is going to be based on who your ideal client is, and really how much customization do they actually need. And depending on the type of client, they actually may need some customization. Then thinking through, how systematic do you want your delivery to actually be, and how systematic do you actually need it to be? The reality of the world is some people want to build a big business. I've got a good close friend of mine that his objective is to have lots of employees, a big office, and all of those things. Not my goal, but more power to him. And that might be yours. And thinking through, how do you actually go about creating livelihood for hundreds of people, or 100 people, or 30, or however many it is. That's great for you and for your objective and for those people that you are employing. So how big do you actually want to grow your team, or not? So start with where you are now, not necessarily just where you want to be, but what exactly is that next stage or next step for you to be able to make that migration towards where you're wanting to go. Now, here's a couple of things that I want you to think about, and frankly, some brutal truths when it comes to productizing. Low prices attract high churn, cheap clients, and it ends up costing a lot. The recurring revenue is not passive income. It's still a service business. So you actually do have to do work. Productizing, makes clients and working with clients easier, but you're still going to need marketing. You're still going to need to do work. You're still going to have to achieve the outcome. It is not this like, I'm done, I'm out reality, at least not tomorrow. It's possible in time. Churn is going to be part of the model. Plan for it. Don't be surprised by it. And also don't be upset by it. Well, maybe be upset by it, but move on from it as quickly as you can. Frameworks are greater than you. And if it's not actually really fully built, then it's not going to actually meaningfully be scalable. So the thing that ultimately ends up changing when you find your model is sales becomes easier, your offer becomes clear, your outcome feels more understood, your price is easier, delivery becomes smoother, you have the same processes every single time, your team feels more competent, everybody ends up knowing their role. So you don't end up having to reinvent things every single time, every single new client, and your business ultimately should be able to start to run without you being in the center of everything. So finding the right productized model changes everything about how you deliver. But delivery is only half of the equation. The other half is making sure that you have predictable revenue coming in every single month in order to support it. And that's something most creative agencies are still getting wrong. So watch the next video on why your creative agency is always one project away from failing, and learn how to build the kind of stable, reoccurring foundation that lets your productized offer actually grow sustainably.